Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today to look at whether voice surveillance is the final piece in the compliant comms puzzle. I'm Jennifer Clark. I'm head of content at Global Relay, and I am joined today by two of our three expert speakers who have a wealth of knowledge surrounding surveillance and technology and the practical application of voice solutions within compliance teams. Martin Gatherell will be joining us shortly. He's just having some technical difficulties, but he has a wealth of experience as a compliance generalist, which spans e-comms, trade surveillance, advisory compliance. And prior to his work in the compliance field, he actually worked within commodity and financial futures. So he's worked right across the spectrum from sales and trading to the back office. Aaron Ehrman is the Global Head of Compliance Technology at TPI-CAP. He's led compliance technology strategies encompassing RegTech, requirements for areas such as trade surveillance, anti-money laundering, and business communication. And finally, Rob Nowatzki, he's our senior SME at Global Relay, who has an extensive experience in banking compliance, having served as a compliance analyst, manager, and calibrations lead in e-com surveillance for Credit Suisse. And that he now is with us and offering a wealth of knowledge. So we're really well equipped today to tackle what is kind of an established but still very much an evolving topic, which is voice surveillance. There have been a huge number of developments in this space over the last year, from regulatory enforcements in the UK and the US, all the way through to advancements in technology. So AI in particular has really changed what we're seeing in that space today. We've got a lot to cover, so I'm not going to labor this introduction. We'll just dive straight in. Just one thing I will add, we are going to do a Q&A at the end. So please do put any questions you have into the chat and we will make time to go through them. So before we get really stuck into it, I want to start with the basics and look at kind of the foundations of why we're looking at voice communication specifically. So Aaron, I'll come to you first. How do voice communications differ from written communications? And is this really a different risk?
Sure, I can start. Thanks, Jen, for having me on the call. I just want to qualify before I start that thank you, that my views are for mine only. I don't represent TPI-CAP on this call, but I will give views today based on my experiences working in the industry in this space. So just to start, I mean, hopefully everyone on the call has exposure to written and voice communications in their day jobs. So I don't want to belabor, but I sit within IT. So I'm wearing a hat on this conversation with IT, but also bridging with how compliance would think about this. And I think, no surprise, written communications, there's a lot of different channels. Humans write differently than they do talk. So when you start to compare voice versus written, how people talk has the uniqueness of potentially where additional risks are. And if you look at some of the fines and some of how market abuse is identified, it can happen in pre-trade where people are talking or writing as well. But I would say that's the first point, is how people write and how people talk are different. Secondly is voice has a lot of different layers of information that you won't get from written. So you can have sentiment, so how people are feeling on a call. You can understand what they're saying. So for example, cuss words or conduct. It opens up a different profile of the person you potentially are monitoring. And tertiary and written, it's very easy to capture the data. You go upstream to third-party vendors like Bloomberg or Ice Chat, and you pull the information. It's just the API that you can sleeve and start looking at words. Whereas voice, it's not written. So when you're trying to monitor for it, it's audio. So you have now language challenges, you have accent challenges, you have vocabulary challenges, so people not understanding words that are being said. And then you also have just the data underneath it and how you can ingest it. So you have different modals of voice, anything from your turrets, your standard turrets, to Cloud9, to even WhatsApp or social media applications. And so capturing that information and having it presented in a way that you can actually analyze it without, and we'll talk about this later, random sampling, just listening to calls, there's that complexity too. So I'll pause there. There's a lot we'll
Yeah.
unpack.
I think it always interests me with voice as well, kind of the emotional level, kind of emotional element to it. Because with written comms, often you'll take a minute to respond, whereas if you're on a call, it's just out there already. Rob, I don't know if I know you've got a fair amount of experience with this.
Yeah, I was about to say that obviously voice also brings different dynamics. And to Aaron's point, obviously, stuff like sentiment, but also saying things in a rush, saying things that happen next to you, and literally all the chatter happening around you on the trading floor, for example. Also, another thing that probably is a bit of thing of the past, but with the desk phones that are now being replaced, previously there was additional challenge of people being logged to their desk phones and then their colleague answering the incoming calls. If someone was off the desk. So then you had this additional challenge of figuring out who actually answered the call. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of challenges just based on the technical setup and the overall fact that we just talk differently. If you look at chat versus the transcript, even if the same matter is being discussed, they are very different looking conversations, and it's as exciting as challenging.
Yeah, I guess guess it depends how you look at it, but I kind of agree with you there. So I suppose if it is a different risk, then historically different solutions have been applied to kind of try and manage and mitigate that risk. Historically, would you say kind of what solutions have been applied in the past and have they worked? Because I know, and it's a shame Martin's not here currently, because I know he has quite a kind of fraught amount of war stories with regard to this, but I'm sure both of you have tough stories as well.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think if you look at the evolution of how voice has been monitored, I mean, there's been a lot of advancements in the last few years. But if you look at what it was prior to where we are today, where transcription is available, it was random sampling. So you have requirements to record voice, you capture it, and then you put an army behind it to listen to voice calls. And it's a needle in a haystack exercise. Finding market abuse will be quite challenging, and it's just about how many people you can put behind it. Voice monitoring was always supported by trade surveillance. So when an alert was in trade systems, you would then go and listen to the pre and post communications as well, or you get inquiries from third parties to review voice. So that's how it has historically been until technology has advanced. And I think we'll talk about where it is now, but that's number one. So it was random sampling. And number two is the quality of our voice recordings as well. Historic voice recorders may not have been up to scratch with being able to identify individual voices, or people speaking over each other was muffled and the quality of the voice was not there, or speaker attribution. You'd have to rely on knowing who's talking. And if you're trying to cover 10 desks and there's 10 people per desk, it's 100 voices you got to recognize. So when you do listen to voice, who is there? But again, all this was very manual, and it was all done outside of a surveillance solution.
Historically, most of that came on the back of LIBOR scandal, right? So it started with monitoring of the treasury calls and submitters calls. But realistically, even then, even though it's relatively small population, you can't really listen to all of the calls. So then you would sample some calls around the submission window, maybe some calls around the fixing. And if you look at it, the expectation slowly expanded. So, for example, the expectation would be to start monitoring the calls of traders trading in anything that is linked to LIBOR. But then if we are talking 60 to 80 traders, how many calls you can sample? Let's say one trader per quarter on a rotational basis. So if you find something, this must be a luck similar to winning on a lottery. And obviously, again, is the balance of resources that you allocate. You either, like Aaron said, you either hire an army of people that will spend hours and hours and days listening to the calls, probably not finding anything useful other than some gossip. And then on the other hand, you can just risk accept the fact that the technology is not there, but you still need to do it because that's the regulatory expectation. And for many years, we were in this very unfortunate position that we had to do it, but no one really wanted to do it. And there was a general agreement that we do it, it's pointless, it's not efficient.
Yeah, it feels like a huge kind of waste of people's time in a way, or a huge amount of manpower for very little reward at the end of it. But at least you're satisfying your kind of obligations. Or just quickly, coming back to something you said, but on languages, how traditionally have languages been managed? If people kind of went into different language formats, was it being transcribed, or was it just kind of being written off? I don't know.
I can speak from my experience that typically if we deployed a new type of monitoring, a new jurisdiction, new location, we would essentially need to hire someone who speaks the dominant language in that location because there was no transcription, the transcription would not be reliable, and you still needed someone to validate the outcomes. So if you are managing a team that is sitting in EMEA and all of a sudden you are onboarding APAC, you need to hire someone who speaks at least Chinese, Cantonese, and Mandarin, and then ideally maybe Japanese and some Korean. That's easily at least 2-3 different people that you would need to hire.
Right.
Yeah, I concur. I think you would probably have level 1, and then when there's something that flagged, or you'd have a local person listening, and you'd have to have someone that can understand the language, or it's void. You wouldn't be able to, and that wouldn't be risk accepted. So at minimum, what Robert said, yeah, is I think industry standard. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I think historically, I mean, I've sat in on a number of roundtables and panel discussions, and the consensus has often been that, yeah, we've got a voice solution, but it's not really working, or we've been trying for a long time. I think maybe we're starting to see a little bit of sea change in that regard. In kind of a modern day compliance or surveillance function, how do you think firms should be looking to manage voice? And how important are things like transcription and translation now?
I can start. Sure.
Sorry.
I'll start. No, I think, well, I guess to qualify, it depends on your jurisdiction and what your regulator is requiring.
Yeah.
And who you're monitoring, and if you're regulated or not regulated. So there's a lot of different dimensions, but let's just assume that you are required to record voice and you're required to monitor your business conduct. I think that, if we're talking about setting up and thinking about how to set up voice monitoring, first you got to make sure your lines are recorded, and that sounds like a simple ask, but having that set up right, and then also making sure that you are governing your line recording. So it's even before it gets to a surveillance monitoring, your infrastructure teams need to make sure the recorders are recording, that the person that's on the line is the person that is speaking. So there's technology like Cloud9 where you have to log in with a password now to access, so you can have attribution of the person speaking. You also have, they call it walk the floor technology to ensure that your lines are being recorded and there isn't disconnects. Some of the fines that we've seen where lines have been disconnected and people don't know it happened. So that's quite critical. I think getting your basics right on recording is step 1. And then step 2 is obviously then how do you capture all those recordings into a location where you can review them. So assume that you don't have transcription or even a surveillance platform. You need to have a place for someone to be listening to those phone calls. Now, historically, you might have 5 different recorders globally. You might have people in having to go into different systems to listen to different records. It's quite fragmented. There's, obviously there's solutions out there now where people are consolidating their voice infrastructure into one location to have a single pane of glass for listening purposes or search and replay purposes. I think that's the second thing, is making sure you can centralize it in one place for ease of review. And then the third thing obviously is now where we're going in technology advancement. So we talk we'll talk a lot more about this, but voice transcription and how you can transcribe voice, the technology behind that, and then also how you ingest that into an existing comm surveillance platform. And then lastly is the policies behind that and how you define it. So we can unpick those steps in this conversation, but that's the end to end, I would say, from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree, especially when it comes to data, because we've seen that data is a big issue for any new technology. Data being all over the place, some data sources not functioning as they should. Plus, even the very basic, you might have your call recording system set up, but it might be a little bit obsolete. So you can still record it in mono, very bad quality, which is obviously not exactly review/transcription friendly. So I would say this will definitely be a key prerequisite for a successful next gen voice implementation. And the second one exactly is just getting used to the new reality where yes, we will need to build some models probably that will be voice specific. We will need to retrain people and change their way of reviewing voice. Maybe have it fully integrated with your comms review. So just make sure you use it in an optimal way rather than as it was often the case, have voice as a separate type of review, almost next to the typical e-commerce program.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm sorry, I'm trying to also get Martin to join the stream, but he can't quite access it, so struggling around at the moment, but it's working. We'll hopefully get him on soon. Just talking slightly about word error rates, I think, Erin, I seem to remember last time you had some thoughts around that, and then having kind of almost like a formula about what percentage was a good percentage and what good looks like. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I think before we talk about that, maybe just in terms of transcription, I mean, the couple just headlines here is that transcription is obviously becoming more available and more open sourced. You'll see, Global Relay and other vendors in the marketplace that are all beginning to offer transcription as a service. And there's a lot of opportunities to hook on to the vendors for transcription. And so that's great. It's advancements. And now I guess why I say that is because regulators are seeing this too. Companies like OpenAI are offering these large language models for free. And they're seeing that they're already using transcription in their own monitoring. And now, it's not prescripted in regulation, but it's definitely being communicated in conferences or roundtables that they are, transcriptions available. And so they're, regulators are asking, well, if you don't have it, what are you doing about it? And so I think to not be looking at transcription is not, the tech is available, and so that's not the right defense you can use now. In terms of what you do about that and how you use transcription, Jen, you talk about word error rate. If you look at some of the big vendors out there like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, their market metrics for English transcription, and we'll start with English, that roughly 84-85%. That is for general English and not necessarily for specific nuanced terminology that's used in trading. If you, and I know you've done some roundtables too, but if you talk on the street, I think 60-70% is reasonable to say that word error rate is good. But my point of view is word error rate really is just talking about the inserts, deletes, how accurate the words are that are being transcribed compared to what they say is ground truth. Ground truth being a human taking 100% of the call, writing down what they hear, and then comparing it to the actual transcription. But my point of view is word error rate's great, and it's a really important component of your transcription proof of concept or proving that it works. But I think the precision recall metrics, which we won't go into detail, but those are basically measuring how accurate the words are hitting against your policies and your survey, whatever your end use case is. So it could be that you want to translate words into numbers and present those numbers into something. Could be that you want to take those words and put it into a surveillance policy. How many policies are being hit on the words that should be hitting? And so when you are looking at transcription and the use case, it's also about the not just word error rate, but precision and recall.
Yeah, of course. Martin, lovely to see you. I'm pleased you were able to join.
My sincere apologies. Zoom
No,
just
you're
refused. For 30 minutes, I have been going round in circles with Zoom.
No, you're all good. Technology, eh? We love it.
Oh, God, I'm very embarrassed. But
no,
obviously, as you can see, I've joined via mobile. Trusty mobile has come in first time.
It's perfect. That's what I love to see. Just to catch you up, we were just talking about solutions and kind of what the current state of play is with regard to kind of what do you need for a modern compliance / surveillance solution. And we were talking a bit about transcription and the role of AI. I know that you have thoughts on this, and I'd love to hear your voice. So
transcription, I think generally, I'm sure Aaron has probably covered, up until recently has been fairly poor. And certainly the system that I was using at my last base really was sort of very suspect in its quality. And we found that it was more as an aid memoir while listening, to use in conjunction with the phone call, because as a standalone document, the transcription and translations just wouldn't stand up. So I think, the developments that we've seen recently are very key to good compliance.
yeah, I agree. Rob, do you have anything to add, or shall I?
Just on the word error rate, obviously, it is a metric just like any other, but it doesn't really tell us a lot. I mean, it's good in validating the model as whole, but we need to remember that one, it's not necessarily specific to the slang, the language we use in financial industry. On the other hand, we don't really want to bias models excessively towards financial slang, because then we might get a lot of hits on words that just sound similar, but actually they are just perfectly legitimate. You don't really want to read about someone's lunch rather than reviewing the actual communication about trades, orders, and market abuse. But in terms of validating the model, I agree that what really matters is being confident enough that transcription will contain words that really matter. So it doesn't have to be spot on, 99.9% accurate. It has to be just good enough so that your policy, your Gen AI, whatever engine you use, is able to understand the context, find the most relevant things that are discussed, and trigger on them. So again, I think we, as much as the metrics help us in overall assessment of the accuracy of the models, it's still going to be a lot of testing and a lot of literal comparison of transcript versus the actual call until we get comfortable that we can implement it and stop listening to the calls.
Yeah, I think it always seems to be the case with any sort of technology and implementing it, is that it's not just to hand it over and let it go. It needs a lot of guardrails to begin with.
I think especially with this one, because the jump has been the most significant in this space in terms of technological progression. We've seen gradual increasement of the use of AI for e-coms, but AI, thanks to various large language models, AI for voice, just significantly increased the accuracy overnight. So I think we don't have this slow curve of experimenting and bringing AI slowly on board as we did with e-coms. With voice, it's just almost like snap and the technology is there. So now we really need to adjust and test it, get comfortable with it. We definitely have less time than we had with other types of surveillance.
Yeah.
But I would say it, yes and no. Just to qualify, I think with anybody that's looking at voice has been on a journey. It's not something that can happen overnight. And to really qualify whether it works for your use cases, it takes time and resources to do. And so I think, anyone on this call that's thinking about exploring transcription, don't expect that the vendor is going to turn on the transcription and everything's going to work. There's a lot of upfront effort that you need to do to set the analysis up to make sure you can compare and contrast before you can conclude whether a transcription provider is doing their role. And as important, if it's landing and being effective in terms of surveillance purposes. So you're not rushed to do it, but you have to absolutely make sure you bake in time and effort and resources and budget, of course, to do it properly. Or you risk turning something on you think is working, and then you have a lot of false positives, and then you're short resources to actually review what's there.
Yeah. I'll move to the next question because I think we can talk about this all day, and I would love to, but we have limited time. So I think this kind of ties into what we're talking about, but over the last year or so, we've seen a number of fines specifically related to either failure to record or failure to surveil audio communications. And that's in the US, specifically looking at swap dealers. And then there's also been action in the UK as well. And actually looking at a lot of the record keeping fines, when you really drill down into the detail, there is sometimes an element of voice in there. Do you think we're now about to see a kind of increased focus from regulators, US, UK, kind of globally? And I wonder how much the kind of capabilities of technology might play a part in regulatory interest now, because perhaps if the regulators know that the technological solutions are now reaching a point of being good enough, is their expectation going to be heightened, and is their focus going to drill down on voice? Martin, I'm going to come to you first, just because I don't feel like you've had as much of an opportunity to talk.
Well, I think most certainly the regulators will. I think as the technology becomes better and improves, they'll take greater interest. And I think particularly as we're moving into a phase where non-financial misconduct is really coming into focus, I think voice will really come back into play. And if the regulators feel that the technology is sound enough, then I think, they will run with it. And, ignorance will be no defense. Poor quality of recordings will be no defense. I mean, as your own system has shown, and I've seen the demonstrations, poor voice recording quality, it will be no excuse anymore. So I think, the regulators will be very much keen on this. I think voice is about to become, a very fundamental part of a compliance package.
Mm-hmm. Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, record keeping is the theme at the moment, and embedded in record keeping is monitoring and ensuring you're overseeing your voice. Obviously the BNY and Mellon fine had implications. They were fined $5 million, and part of that was not monitoring their voice communications for their associated persons. But to your point, Martin, I agree, and I think what's happening right now is regulators, for European, they're scaling up in voice. I think they've been hyper focused on trade surveillance, building out their capabilities and systems around that, and now they're pivoting. You talk to the vendor landscape. I think every vendor has talked to the regulators about and demoing their platforms, which is great because it helps all the industry move the right direction. But as the regulators are seeing that this is out there, it's obviously keeping them in their jobs to think about how they can enhance their systems, number one, but then prescribe it either through market watches or through indirect communications, that it's something they're going to be expecting. The US, on the other hand, I think they're a lot further in terms of their tech and using transcription to do their own surveillance purposes. So no doubt that they're doing that as part of their investigations as well. Again, nothing's on paper saying transcription is mandated, but if you look at the street and who is doing transcription, most regulated firms are doing it or are looking at it, and the bigger players can do it more so because there's a cost to it. Smaller players probably aren't there yet, but they're absolutely sniffing around and thinking about it. And so the wave is coming. Might be another, 18 to 24 months, but it will come back, and voice isn't going away. I mean, electronification of trading is definitely happening in certain asset classes, but other asset classes, voice is predominant way of trading.
Well, I think, there's been a tendency almost to, voice has become the forgotten element in the, as trading moved on to more sort of platform, message type platforms. I think voice got cast aside, and it's never gone away. It's still the quickest way to communicate short, sharp messages. And, if someone knows that that's the weak link, and then they are committed to sort of nefarious activities, shall we say, then they'll exploit that and they will go to voice. Voice is the quick and dirty way to communicate. And, and I think it's been forgotten in recent years. And as you say, I think it's about to come into focus. I think certainly the US regulators with the APs are very clear. It was made clear to my last shop during Dodd-Frank audit, that the transcriptions, etc., were an absolute requirement. So I think US regulators are fairly clear as far as the APs go. You're under no illusion that you're expected to provide that.
Yeah, agree. Rob, do you have anything to add, or shall I go to the really exciting thing?
Let's go to a really exciting thing. Also being conscious of some Q&A upcoming.
Yeah, of course.
So.
So we are going to briefly take you away from the screen and give you a 2-minute demo type thing from Global Relay, just to show you what our current voice solution is. I saw somebody in the chat asked for solutions. Now is their time. I hope they didn't leave, but yes, so we will do a quick demo and then we will go into Q&A. So please do put any questions that you have in the chat.
Global Relay's transcription service is based upon the largest large language models, with over 1.5 billion parameters and trained on thousands of hours of multilingual datasets, which provides industry-leading transcription accuracy across 57 languages as standard. With inbuilt language detection and a robustness to accents, product names, numbers, acronyms, and poor audio quality, this automated transcription service enables all voice data to be transcribed accurately into its native language. From there, it can be stored securely with all other communication channels for a set retention periods and can be used for search and surveillance purposes. E-discovery and surveillance users can now easily locate recordings based upon what was said during the call and get straight to the most relevant part of the call without the need of listening to the recording several times. Our waveform provides a visual representation of the audio and provides users with a method to navigate through the audio. Any surveillance policy violations are clearly highlighted in red, which can be used to quickly jump to that part of the call. Transcriptions are clearly displayed underneath the waveform and can also be used to navigate through the recording, or with auto scroll enabled, the user can simply sit back and read and listen at the same time. Finally, on-demand translation is built in, so there's no need to risk sending data outside of the security of the system for translation purposes.
Okay, I told you it was short. It's like a in-flight ad. So yes, that is the Global Relay solution. Obviously, if you are interested, please reach out. I won't labor that point because we have lots of questions coming in. So I don't know which one we want to go with first. I don't know if the panel's seen any of them stick out of interest. Martin, I'm not actually sure if you can see the questions that are coming in from mobile or not.
No.
Okay, so I might read this first one out from Stephen. I'm not sure actually, Rob, whether you might have half covered this in something that you mentioned earlier. Go on.
Yeah, so the question from Stephen regarding word error rate against special words of interest and so on, and the training point. And I think specifically on the training, we kind of answered it in the video. So the current models, they are using 1.5, 1.6 billion parameters and more. So there's only a little training possible unless you supply it with millions parameter more. And they seem to be broad enough to understand various contexts. And I believe it is currently answering the challenge of models being previously a bit too biased. Now, because they have so many parameters, they are not only finance specific, but they understand just pretty much any single topic. Obviously, you know, not literally, but they are really broad. They are more able to isolate different topics, different subjects being discussed, rather than just thinking, oh, this is finance and this is not finance. So I think it really helped to increase accuracy. And also on language switching, so the second question from you, Stephen, I'm not seeing this as something that would distort the accuracy, because the couple of models that we tested internally, and they are quite popular on the market, they are trained, they are more like type of language or within the language group. So let's imagine French and French Canadian, Spanish from Spain versus Spanish from South America. They are agnostic of those language variations, meaning that because they were trained across the entire language, they are more efficient when it comes to transcribing edge cases. So really very odd accents, very specific dialects. So I think there's been a general change in the approach in model building that actually helped to achieve better accuracy overall when we face edge cases, dialects, accents, and so on. But I'll pause here for Martin and Aaron to answer as well.
Yeah, and Martin, for your benefit, that second question was, do you see that language switching and non-native speakers, the word recognition errors will distort the accuracy of AI?
I think, you know, what I've seen so far, and we certainly, you know, my last shot, we took part in the, you know, Global Relay Challenge and provided some German content, which was translated perfectly. And, you know, the regional dialects that we saw put into the system on the tests when I was there were all recognized. So I don't, you know, I think after a period of learning, you know, it probably, there'll be less distortion. I mean, I'm sure to start with, you know, as Rob has indicated, they're going, you know, there's a learning curve here and AI needs to learn. So initially, maybe some distortion, but long term, I don't see it. I think, you know, it'll adapt very quickly.
Guess that's the great thing about AI, is that it is able to learn.
Yeah, and you know, probably quicker than we can keep up.
Yes, the positives and the negatives.
Very much.
I don't know, Rob, Erin, if you want to choose which one you'd like to take next.
I mean, we can. I mean, I saw one comment that was dismissed. It said, "I'm hearing a lot about challenges but no solutions." Maybe just about, you know, how to go about this and what's out there. I can see some Zoom questions and understanding about consent. I mean, I guess setting up surveillance, and Martin, you've done it too. So I think you need technology and you need compliance to be aligned and joined up on what the requirements are in the use case. You need to have, you know, someone that can understand the what you want to monitor. So typically it's from a market abuse risk assessment. You define what you want to, who you might want to monitor for voice, and then you can look at how they communicate and what channels they're using from a voice perspective. And then you know, target operating model. You have a team of IT people that are working with the vendors to get the voice connected to the transcription provider. And then they are reviewing the output from the transcription provider. But you have to have ground truth, as I mentioned before, which is somewhat human has to mark their homework and say what good looks like, and then compare if you really want to see the word error rate, or you can do it qualitatively and have people just listen to calls and say if it feels accurate or not. I've seen both operating models work for just confirming if transcription's worthwhile. But then the second piece of that pie is the compliance side. So what technology are you using for surveillance purposes? You probably have an eComms lexicon-based surveillance at minimum. So if you're just running that transcription through your lexicons, how accurate are they hitting against the transcription? Are there words that are missing that should be there? That goes back to the point we just talked about. You can train models with more prescript words. You can give models out of the box your lexicons, for example, and that can train, but you do risk overtraining, and you do risk potentially the transcription over or trying to align words that or substitute words that aren't there. So it's a balancing act, and you have to have guardrails, like you said, Jen, about monitoring the training of the system. But training is important. Don't expect that out of the box. The model will be accurate, maybe 75%, if you're lucky, but you definitely do have to tune and train. And training does include adding potential bespoke words that are used in your context for trading purposes, that you just won't get out of the box from even the best transcription providers. So
Great.
yeah. Okay.
Nice.
Next one, I can just take how do you know someone's
Yeah, if you
how do you know? I mean, I can speak for teams. Teams, you know, someone's transcribing because there's a message at the top of the team's recording that says it's being recorded. WhatsApp for business has that as well, that it's being captured and you have to say yes to it. That's the WhatsApp Business API. Outside of that, transcription, it's a good question. I don't know, Martin, if anybody's seen, I can't speak to other platforms.
No, I haven't.
You can always ask on the call, are we being transcribed? But I guess what I would say to that is, if you're doing business with somebody, expect that you're being transcribed and behave that way.
The thing is, does it,
Yeah.
you know, is it that separate from being recorded? You know, if you've consented or you agree that you're being recorded because you're carrying out regulated activities, I'm not really sure that, you know, being transcribed actually changes that situation. You know, you've consented to be recorded. Transcription, I think, is just part of that. You know, because where do you stop then? You say, well, you're also going to be listened to. If you're going to be recorded, you're going to be listened to. So do you have to give consent for someone else to listen, etc.? So I think it, you know, to be honest, I think it becomes part of the, you know, it just becomes enclosed in the whole thing about being recorded. It's part of the recorded package.
Yeah, I agree. It's actually a really interesting kind of area, actually, because I've been in a lot of meetings recently, not within Global Relay, actually, but those meeting recording apps now as well that start to exist, where you've got an AI tool that listens into all your meetings and summarizes your notes. So I think people are being recorded much more than they used to be, and also consent definitely is a very blurry area. There's also one about Zoom. I think there probably is the same thing to kind of what you're just talking about, but the idea of Zoom, is there a way to get around it? Because often when you join a Zoom call, if it's being recorded, it will say this call is being recorded, and you can
Yeah,
kind of
I think the question is also how not to be caught off guard with a call not being recorded. And to this point, currently the connectors that we use, they are either direct to API of the platform, or we use the recorder bots. So basically, this is closing the gap. We are not using the user-initiated recording anymore whenever possible, exactly for that reason. If someone forgets to record a call, then you don't have any record of it. So for that reason, that's basically a legacy solution. We use APIs for bots.
Okay. There's a question here around language routing models. Do you want to take that? I know that we're at time, and it's quite complex thing.
I can very quickly speak for ourselves. Language routing models were those that basically, ideally, you would identify 3 languages or up to 3 languages, maybe 5, that this person is likely to speak, and then if it was falling outside of those languages, it would not be transcribed or fully captured. The current models, they have, the one that we are using, for example, has 57 languages at any point in time. If it's either of those 57, it will be transcribed. So again, this was the problem that was well known for the early days transcription models that has been now addressed with the large language models. But yes, I agree. It used to be a major problem, especially when you had to really narrow down the scope of your transcription to very specific set of languages.
Okay, brilliant. Well, with that, I'll call it to a close because we promised 45 minutes and we've given them 49, some extra minutes. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. And thank you to the panel of speakers. I know you're incredibly busy people and it means a lot that you took the time to do it. If you are after resources, there is a resources section on the side where you can download some information. We will be sending an email around with some kind of snippets from what was installed today and the video. So you can look forward to that in your inboxes. But yes, thank you all and speak soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.